We dive into your mailbag questions next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we returned here with another episode of Locked On Ravens. I am your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. We return. It is Wednesday, another midweek edition of the show. And that means it's mailbag time. Mailbag time here on Locked On Ravens. We have 3 segments jam-packed with those questions. The Ravens obviously coming off of that disappointing 22-10 defeat in Week 10 to the Miami Dolphins. They now have the Chicago Bears on the docket in Week 11. And there's a lot for the Ravens to improve upon. Definitely. There are a lot of positives to take away too, but after the loss, a lot of those improvement areas are magnified, especially because this is a game now that the Ravens really do need to win. So we'll get into mailbag questions in all 3 segments here. So we'll dive into it. Before we do that, though, if you are following along with us in audio form, so Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, be sure to follow the show, turn notifications on so you know when our content comes out. But I'll tell you right here, it's Monday through Friday at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. It's the same thing over on YouTube. If you want a video version of the podcast, we are on YouTube 5 days a week as well. If you are following along with us on YouTube, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. We are going for 1,000 subscribers here on Locked On Ravens as our first goal. And also be sure to follow me on Twitter at KOstriker34 and the Locked On Ravens Twitter account at Locked On Ravens. So let's dive into it here. 3 segments of mailbag questions. Let's dive into segment 1 briefly though. Of course, the news, the Ravens releasing Le'Veon Bell yesterday. They seemingly want to give more opportunities to other people. Bell didn't really impress on the field, looked a step slow. So, his release wasn't really necessarily a surprise to me, but he still really embraced the Ravens culture. And from a culture perspective, it seemed like he really did fit in and was buying into everything. So it's sad to see him go from that perspective. But on the field, I think the Ravens figured that they just needed more production from the running back position when the run game was really Lamar Jackson and not much else. So just a brief little news dump there for the Ravens. But let's dive into the mailbag, starting off with a question from Ben Rose. He asks, can this pass defense improve enough to at least be average? The big plays in the secondary are very concerning. And so, looking at the stats here as I pulled them up, the Ravens' pass defense has not been good this year. They rank last in total yards allowed with 2,550. They rank 29th in net yards per attempt allowed with 7.3. They only have 5 interceptions this year. So it's not great. It ranks 22nd in the NFL. So they're a bottom unit there, at least a bottom-ish tier unit there. They've allowed 14 passing touchdowns. So that's 16th right in the middle. But yeah, this passing defense, it's so interesting to me. And obviously you can attribute it to a lot of different things. And then the big one I'll attribute it to is the loss of Marcus Peters and Deshaun Elliott and just having to cycle in guys. This is for the entire roster. It's where the continuity of playing next to somebody, of being, whether it's on the offensive line, next to somebody on the offensive line, or in the secondary, whether it's playing next to somebody in the secondary, things like that can have a big impact. Now, the Ravens do have stars. They have Marlon Humphrey. Anthony Avertt's played really well. Chuck Clark has played super well this year, but they just haven't been able to put it together. Teams are dashing them through the air. Against Miami, they did play pretty well. But at the same time, it's the communication of not having a player like Deshaun Elliott in there. So you're working with a Brandon Stevens. And so those are where the big plays in the pass game get given up. And the pass numbers are skewed a little bit because of the big plays. But at the end of the day, those are part of it, right? The big plays are a part of the passing defense. So it's one thing to say, the Ravens gave up 200 yards in 8 plays. And then the rest of the plays, they've given up like 2 yards a catch or whatever. Those aren't real stats, but I'm just saying. But it's another to say, you know what? They might be giving up not a lot of yards per pass, but at the same time, they're giving up the yards. But you just heard the stats I gave out. They're both in the bottom in yards and net yards per attempt given up. So I do think they have the potential to be at least average. I mean, they have too much star power not to at least have that potential. The big plays are concerning, though, Ben. I do agree with you, and I think they have to cut down on those to really start. That's the starting point for this passing defense. Now, it also hasn't helped that the Ravens haven't been a high turnover team and a high sack team. And for any secondary covering for 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds. It's not ideal whatsoever. Each second that goes by is more likely for an opponent to complete a pass. So that's not necessarily an excuse, but it doesn't help things. So I think the Ravens definitely do have the talent in their secondary to become an average pass defense. It honestly can't get so much worse than what we've seen so far this year. We've seen spurts from them where they have been really, really good. And then we've just seen spurts like the second half against Cincinnati where it's been atrocious and awful. So hopefully as the season goes on and the Ravens get into that tough stretch, they're able to tighten up in the pass game. They will have to on defense if they want to make a run. And I think, again, the talent is there. It's a matter of execution and play calling and everything combined into one to make sure that, if they are an average unit, I think that's enough for them. They don't have to be a top 5 unit this year, but they have to at least be average in order to, I think, achieve a lot of their goals, both at the back half of the year and in the playoffs, assuming they do get there. We're going to talk about 2 questions from Brendan Ward here now. The first being, one, the lack of production and points in the first half of games is limiting this team's potential. Do you believe it has more to do with play calling, lack of prep, or lack of execution? And this is a good question because, as I just kind of talked about for the defensive side of the ball, I think it's everything combined a little bit. You can't put it all on the players. You can't put it all on the coaches. And it's even with the prep, you can't put it all on the prep. Now, each is obviously important in its own right. Obviously, at the end of the day, what the players do on the field is what is the result that you're going to get, right? If the coaches coach up well and the prep is there, but the players don't execute, you're getting what the players don't do on the field as a result. Then, if the players execute, even though the coaching staff doesn't have the prep, then it's like, all right, well, you still kind of got by with it, but at the same time, it wasn't as easy. The play calling also can affect the production on the field. So it is all combined and tied into one. But yeah, there are limiting factors for this team. And one of them, I agree, is definitely the lack of production and points in the first half, the not getting off to fast starts. It's all impacting the flow of games because let's say against Miami, we can go back to week 10. The Ravens, they scored 10 points on their first 2 drives. For reference, the Ravens scored 3. Instead of having the lead be 7 points for the Ravens, assuming the Dolphins did have, a couple of field goals or whatever it may be. If there's a 3-point lead for the Dolphins or a 6-point lead for the Dolphins, the Ravens are out in front at halftime in this scenario because the Dolphins had 6 points at halftime. The Ravens had 3 points at halftime. So if the Ravens score 10 points on their first 2 drives, they're up 10-6 going into half. And I think that in turn, it might not be a big lead, but at least it's a lead. And it's able to give the offense maybe a tiny bit more confidence or something like that. And I think that's really a big factor in this because for how well the Ravens have played from behind and gotten those come from behind victories, it's one thing to do that every week, but it's not sustainable, really, right? It can be, but you're playing with fire each and every week. The Ravens have had amazing, incredible comeback wins, but I think, if I were the Ravens, I would rather have those big leads or at least a lead to work with to defend. And I think that helps both an offense and a defense for sure. So yeah, I think it's everything. The play calling has to be better. The execution has to be better. The preparation has to be better. All 3 of those things kind of met on Thursday night, and we saw the result, just a really bad performance against a team that they really should have beaten. The second question from Brendan, the last thing on my Ravens 2021 bingo card was Josh Bynes being the best player on defense. And I tweeted about Josh Bynes yesterday. He looks so fast on this field, so explosive on this field in 2021. He's a rejuvenated football player this year. He played well for the Bengals in 2020. Wasn't a perfect player, but he played good football for them. And obviously we know in 2019 he came in and did a great job with LJ Fort. Those 2 acquisitions were really big for them. But it's not just on the field production. And I know we talk so many times about, just how a team can benefit from having a veteran on the roster. We see it with Justin Houston, even though he doesn't have 10 sacks right now, he is still producing. And he's also being a mentor for players like Adafe Owe. For Josh Bynes, he's being a mentor for Patrick Queen and for Malik Harrison and for Chris Board and all those young linebackers, Kristen Welch. And he's also performing at a high level. He has been a really solid tackler. He did have a missed tackle in Miami. I know he wants that one back, but for the most part, he's tackled pretty well. He's flying to the football. He's disruptive in the run game. He's made a couple nice plays in coverage. I mean, he, to me, has been the Ravens' defensive MVP. And, you can give that arm to a lot of people, but who knows what happens to this defense if Patrick Queen and Malik Harrison don't have that veteran mentor. And it's not a shot to them, right? If you go back to when TJ Mosley and Patrick Owasso played really, really well, during the 2018 season together, right? Patrick Owusu was flying on the field, really confident in his play because he had a veteran in CJ Mosley next to him who was kind of taking some of that responsibility off of his plate, and Owusu could play off of Mosley. Now, Mosley left, and Owusu got the green dot and was placed in the middle of that defense next to Kenny Young, who was an inexperienced player. And look what happened. They did not play well together. They get rid of Kenny Young halfway through the year, or before halfway through the year, honestly. And Owusu isn't in Baltimore anymore. He hasn't been for a few years. So I think the addition of a veteran has really helped Patrick Queen. He's been such a savior. He's been a savior of this defense. And Josh Bynes, I think, we'll look back at this season, regardless of how it goes at the end here in the stretch run here, and say that Josh Bynes was probably the best addition for the Ravens in free agency during the 2021, whether it was offseason or in the regular season and in-season acquisition as well. We're going to head into our first break, though. When we get back, we're going to be diving into more mailbag questions, so stay tuned for that, and we'll be right back. Hey Ravens fans, this is Kevin Oestreicher with an incredible app everyone who buys gas needs to know about in Get Upside. Just download the free Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now and use promo code TOUCHDOWN and get a bonus 25 cents per gallon on your first fill-up. That's up to 50 cents a gallon cash back. And don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Just get cash back using Get Upside and download the app for free and use promo code TOUCHDOWN to get up to 50 cents a gallon cash back on your first tank. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $200 to $300 a month in cash back, and there's no catch. The cash back gets added right to your account. You can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or any gift card for Amazon and other brands. Just download the free Get Upside app and use promo code TOUCHDOWN to get up to 50 cents a gallon cash back on your first tank. That's code TOUCHDOWN. We return here, our second segment of this Wednesday edition of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still hanging out with you here. And we just talked about mailbag questions in our first segment. We're going to do the exact same thing here in our second segment as we dive into more. And we'll start off here with a question from James K. And he asks, is there any hope for a pass rush this week? And, I think there is. I do think there is a hope for this pass rush. Now, regardless of what teams they are playing, they're probably not going to be as bad as the Dolphins' offensive line. And against the Dolphins' offensive line, I was saying, if they can't get a pass rush against this offensive line that has struggled immensely, who are they going to do it against? And what do? They end up getting 4 sacks on Dolphins quarterbacks. And I was overall encouraged by that performance. Now, Baltimore, they ended up, making some strides in that area. They're averaging now over 2 sacks a game. They had 4. They were averaging just under 2 sacks a game before week 10. But I do think now going up against Chicago, you have young quarterback in Justin Fields, a Bears offensive line that has not seen this Ravens defense in 4 years. So, a lot of new faces there. They do have talented players, but at the same time, it kind of goes back to what I've been saying about young quarterbacks and this Ravens defense. First year, second year, third year. It goes for an offensive line too that, hasn't seen a Ravens defense in 4 seasons where, you can watch all the tape you want. Once you get in the game against such a complex defense, it can be difficult to pick up blitzes and identify blitzes at the line. Part of it falls on the quarterback, part of it falls on the offensive line. And so, players can get rattled, whether it is a quarterback, whether it is an offensive line. The Ravens have talent on their pass rushing unit. For me, it's always been a question of, is it the talent or is it the scheme? And I've been leaning towards scheme for a little bit here because we've seen players leave Baltimore and have immense success, consistent success. And, they come to Baltimore. The Ravens have been a high-pressure team. It's not like the Ravens are terrible at rushing the passer. It's just they don't get sacks necessarily. And then sometimes when they blitz, whether it's 4, whether it's 5, 6, whatever, it just doesn't get there. And even though they're blitzing and they have more rushers than there are blockers, a guy runs into a gap. Like against Miami, Patrick Queen ran directly into one of his teammates instead of taking a gap. And it's those types of plays. So I think that with the way Patrick Queen has improved, and he's a good blitzer, hopefully Tavon Young can play. He's a good blitzer off the edge. They lost Deshaun Elliott, who also was a good blitzer, but they can use Brandon Stevens in that role. If they want to bring pressure up against the Chicago offensive line and really force Justin Fields to make throws against that, whether they want to do their own cover 0 stuff, they can do that and see where it takes them. But it's going to be key for them this week to get pressure with 4. I just think it's really important for them to do that. So getting interior pressure from Calais Campbell and just Madubuike on the inside, Justin Houston and Lafayette, any of those guys, Tyus Bowser, and even their blitzers, I think that'll be really important. So yes, James, I think there's hope. I think there is hope this week. But again, they're entering a tough stretch. I think they could use this to build some momentum ahead of their rough stretch where, they have all those divisional games, then obviously the Packers and the Rams. Our next question here comes from K. Kahuan6, who asks, could the Ravens possibly use Duvernay the same way San Francisco uses Deebo Samuel in the backfield? And yes, the Devin Duvernay question. This is one people were talking about it on Twitter. I saw, and I've been asked this question multiple times before. I think the Ravens should use Devin Duvernay in multiple roles. Now, is that lining him up in the backfield? At this point, the Ravens might try it because the running backs this season have not been amazing. But Deebo Samuel is such a unique player, such a good player. And Devin Duvernay is too. I think with the way the Ravens already utilize Duvernay, it wouldn't hurt to try him out in a role potentially like that. Now, how much the Ravens would actually line him up in the backfield and say, hey, you know what, go take this carry. I don't know, like whether they want to really do that, if they want to line him up in the shotgun next to Lamar Jackson or whatever they want to do. But they use him on jet sweeps. He's shown his ability to be an explosive player as a runner out of the backfield when he's taking sweeps and taking handoffs, whatever. So I think that when looking at a player like Duvernay, and if the Ravens need a spark on offense, they tend to try to get Duvernay involved in those plays at least once a week. It seems like it's kind of a thing where maybe they want to open up that part of the playbook, because I think with Greg Roman, his offense is something where we haven't seen a ton of those quote unquote trick plays before, right? We saw the pitchbacks and all those different things where they kind of use them, but at the same time, maybe lining up Duvernay for a couple of trick plays or putting him in the backfield to take a carry or two to kind of switch up a defense. That can really help. And maybe they're waiting for the later games where they don't want to put it on film for teams to study. They want to surprise teams, and that's okay. But at some point, you got to use it. So I'd be okay definitely with Duvernay being used in that role. I think he's earned more touches. I think he is an explosive, dynamic player, much like Deebo Samuel over there in San Francisco. So yeah, I'm all aboard the Devin Duvernay getting some more responsibilities in his role and seeing what he can do on the offensive side of the ball even more, because he's impressed me this year. I think he's played really well. Our last question here before we head into our final break comes from Elias Page, who asks, who is the defensive MVP so far? So, spoiler, I said it was Josh Bynes. Let me pick a different player, though, because I know for this Ravens team, the defense, it's been a little inconsistent. So, best acquisition, definitely Bynes. Maybe I'd call him the defensive MVP. I think that's my pick for now. But if you want to go all-around player who you could really give that title of defensive MVP to for his play throughout the entire season, because Josh Bynes wasn't on the active roster and wasn't playing for a couple weeks, I'm going to go Chuck Clark. I think Chuck Clark is there. Also, surprise pick for me, Tavon Young. I think Tavon Young's played very well this year. So you know what? We're going three-way tie for defensive MVP. We're going Josh Bynes, Chuck Clark, Tavon Young. In my rankings, I'd probably go Clark, Bynes, Young, but it's pretty close. The only reason I'm not giving it to Bynes outright is because he just didn't play for the first couple of weeks, but he's played so great when he's been on the field. But Clark is a do-it-all player. He's someone who can really make an impact in multiple ways, and his role is just so complex and so big on this defense, where he's the glue guy, right? Good communicator. Obviously the Ravens have had those defensive mishaps or communication issues, and, it falls on the entire defense, but I think that with how Clark has played, his improvement this season, the way he played off of Deshaun Elliott before Elliott got injured, unfortunately, he's played up at the line, he's played back, he's played in coverage, he's rushed the quarterback, he's done all this different stuff, played at dime. He's such a unique chess piece on this defense, and with the way he's played, it's hard not to give it to him as the award. Now, Bynes, again, just, is this, I'm going to say MVP is Clark, savior is Josh Bynes. I'm giving the savior award to Josh Bynes. Tavon Young's played solid all-around football this year. Has really looked rejuvenated after his season-ending injury he suffered during the 2020 season, the early part of that. A lot of people had questions on Tavon Young, suffering 3 season-ending injuries in 5 seasons. How would that impact him? But he's been a really good tackler, arguably the Ravens' best tackler. That's something, because the Ravens have not been great as a tackling team this season overall, but he's played great in coverage. He's one of the better slot cornerbacks in the NFL. So the Ravens have talent on the defensive side of the ball. I've been very impressed with some of their talent. Now, again, it's a matter of getting that talent, putting it all together, because we've seen, the past defense, we've talked about it, just not great this year. The rush defense is better. If you want to actually look at stats for the rush defense, you have a team that is doing, okay. They actually have only given up the 4th amount of yards with 794. Actually, the 10th best team in terms of giving up yards per attempt. They give up 4.2. That's 10th in the NFL. So the run defense has actually been pretty solid. And when you watch them, there aren't really a ton of big runs that this team gives up. The big plays generally come in the pass game. So, the fact that, funny enough, the defensive MVPs are in the secondary and a linebacker is pretty funny when you take all that into account. But yeah, the Ravens have some areas to improve, but there have been players individually who've been playing very, very well. And I'm excited to see what they can do over the rest of the 2021 season. We're going to head into our final break, though. When we get back, we're going to be diving into our last batch of mailbag questions. So stay tuned for that, and we'll be right back. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar ever. If you haven't tried a Built Bar by now, you're missing out. They say it's a protein bar, but it does not taste like one. You have to try one of these amazing bars yourself to believe it. Most protein bars are chalky or waxy or just plain hard to choke down. A Built Bar is soft, covered in 100% real chocolate, and when you bite into it, you know you're eating something different. It's more of an experience, one that you'll enjoy. In fact, you'd swear you're eating a candy bar. So go to Built.com and use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off of your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. We're back and better than ever. A new web interface for the start of basketball season and more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the basketball and football action this season. Enter our new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code LOCKEDON to receive your bonus. From basketball, football, baseball, postseason, NHL boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. We've returned here, our final segment of this mailbag edition of Locked On Ravens on Wednesday. Kevin Ostreicher, your host, still here with you. And we did mailbag questions in the first segment, mailbag questions in the second segment. Let's wrap it up here with our final batch of mailbag questions. And we're going to start off with two here from Menachem Gerstmann, who asks, one, why did the Ravens stop the running game after the first two drives, the best drives of the game? And it seems like the Ravens are really moving the ball effectively on those first two drives. We saw Devonta Freeman do a lot of good things with his legs, and all of a sudden you see the shift. The Ravens get 3 points on those two drives. They get around 90 yards, 92 yards on the first two drives combined. And then the short passing game starts to creep up. We see the screen passes, the checks the line to screens, and all of a sudden the offense stops moving the ball, and it doesn't necessarily help things when the rush offense has been pretty poor in some scenarios and most scenarios for this season. So it's not like you have a ton of confidence in your ground game, but then all of a sudden on a 2nd and 17, you run you run the ball with Le'Veon Bell and it picks up like 1 yard. And it's like, you're running it there, but not in this or this or this or this situation. And it's just, it's a matter of the execution, the play calling, much like we talked about earlier in the show, where I think for an offense to be successful, you have to be balanced. And this goes back to beyond this season for the Ravens. It was the same thing when the Ravens were running the ball super effectively and the pass offense sometimes stumbled. It was to win a Super Bowl, you can run the football well, and you need to do that to win a Super Bowl, but you also have to be able to play your passing offense and have a passing offense that can strike fear in opposing defenses. And for the Ravens, it was very hit or miss for them early on in the past couple of seasons. Their pass offense wasn't terrible. I mean, people look at the Ravens in the last couple of years and they say, wow, the Ravens can't throw the ball. They're terrible at passing. That's not true whatsoever, and it wasn't true. But it just wasn't up to snuff with where it needed to be. And now we're seeing the pass offense perform a lot better. And all of a sudden, the run game is struggling this year. Outside of Lamar Jackson, it's been Lamar Jackson and not much else. Devonta Freeman's looked better. So, yeah, it was just execution and play calling as to why they actually moved away from the run game. I think they wanted to just switch things up. The Dolphins were sending pressure and sending a ton of guys, and it was really clogging up rushing lanes. And, the Ravens could have put formations in to say, we're going to counter those cover zero looks, but they wanted to see if the short passing game would work. In order to beat a blitzing defense, it's not necessarily running the football that's the most effective. It is the short passing game, but it was untimely screens, badly executed short passes, drop passes, and all of a sudden you have to start looking in the mirror and saying, what do we need to do? The time is running out, and all of a sudden you can't run the football as much because you're kind of forced, or you're pressuring yourself into becoming a one-dimensional offense. So, yeah, I would have liked to see the Ravens run the ball, but it just wasn't effective against Miami in week 10. And maybe the Ravens just saw that and said, you know what, we're going to try to beat this blitz with the short passing game, which in theory is the right way to do it. But, if it's not working, then you're out of luck. Our next question here from Menachem is, where is Jimmy Smith and why isn't he getting more snaps? And so, yeah, the mystery of Jimmy Smith is one that I think is honestly one of the bigger mysteries this season because, the Ravens have a ton of injuries in the secondary, and pulling up the actual snap counts for Jimmy Smith over the past 2 weeks, it's interesting because you'd expect a player like Jimmy Smith, who has the positional versatility to, kind of do some good things, but he played 1 snap in week 9, 10 snaps in week 10 for a grand total of 11 snaps over the past 2 weeks. And it's maybe they're saving him or he's just not 100%, but he's not on the injury report, so that's not the case. So I don't know what it is. The Ravens, I think they should be using him a little bit more than they are. Maybe they see something we don't, and he's just not going to be able to come out and produce at a high level, and they trust other guys over him. They also, Chris Westry coming back doesn't necessarily help that case if they feel like Westry is just better fit to play right now. But, Smith kind of is a hybrid corner safety where they can use him in a ton of different roles. So, yeah, that Jimmy Smith kind of mystery is one that I'm interested to see how it works out, because I think Smith could be playing more, and honestly should be playing more than 1 snap on defense. I mean, it definitely should be more than just 1 snap for Jimmy Smith, for a player that has, done so much for the organization. And obviously you're not going to play players just based off of what they've done for the organization. If they can play, they can play. And if they can't, they obviously can't. But, with the Ravens being so thin in the secondary, no Marcus Peters, no Deshaun Elliott, Tavon Young's kind of banged up right now. I do think that they could use a player like Jimmy Smith on the football field, and somebody who could, potentially go out there. And if he's only played 11 snaps in the past 2 weeks, he's fresh, right? I mean, he's fresh. So the Ravens could utilize him maybe more in the coming weeks, but it is still interesting to see he's only played that little snaps, 11, over the past 2 weeks combined. Our final question here comes from Ravens 5-3. Well, 6-3, unfortunately. Yeah, 6-3 for the Ravens right now. How should the Ravens defense look to avoid letting up big plays against Fields? Is bringing pressure always the answer? And so, yeah, this is a good question. I think you got to start with pressure. You got to rattle Fields early. And I think when looking at what this team has done to young quarterbacks, as I talked about earlier in the show, who have faced this Ravens defense for the first time. Let's go back to week 6. Justin Herbert coming into M&T Bank Stadium. Justin Herbert was lauded as an MVP candidate coming into this game. Is Justin Herbert an MVP candidate? Week 5, 6, right around that time, he was really hitting his stride, one of the hottest quarterbacks in the NFL. The Ravens defense shut him down. It was his first time seeing this Ravens defense. He just got rattled. I think he was confused. The defense played lights out. You go to week 7 against Joe Burrow, who had already faced this Ravens defense once in 2020 in week 5. He had his worst game as a professional, in my opinion, in that game. He comes back. This is his second time playing the Ravens in week 7 in 2021. He lights him up, especially in the second half. So for a player like Fields, who is just starting to find his footing at the NFL level, the Bears don't necessarily have the most high-powered offense in the NFL. It's not like they're blowing out teams every week. I think that if you can bring pressure, rattle Fields early, maybe force a turnover or two, that'd be big, or maybe push them back a little bit. And obviously, a fast start on offense would definitely help that. I think that the Ravens could really make this game one where it's a statement game for them. And they come out and they play great defense. They get the fast start on offense. This is a game that they have to win, in my opinion. It'd be really tough to head into their final stretch of games, losing 2 straight to teams they most definitely should have beaten. This is a game the Ravens should probably win. Matt Nagy, their head coach there in Chicago, fans are clamoring for him to get fired. So it's that kind of scenario where if the Ravens don't win this game, the concerns really start to come up. But I'm confident in them. I think they can bounce back. These players are mad. These players want to prove that week 10 was not what they are about. And yeah, I think at the end of the day, the Ravens can do a lot to silence their haters and doubters, but they're going to have to do it. If they can't execute, the play calling isn't there, they don't prep, then they're probably going to lose, and that's not what you want. So hopefully the Ravens can do a lot to rattle Justin Fields, to get off to that fast start, and do a lot to win this game in week 11, because I really do think they need it. That's all that I have for you here today, though, on Locked On Ravens. We'll make it back here tomorrow. We'll be diving into Crossover Thursday with Locked On Bears. So stay tuned for that, and I will see you tomorrow.